everyone. In SketchUp Part 6, we're going to be simply looking at beginning terrain, which happens to be actually probably some of the more complex concepts to learn in SketchUp. So by the end of this video, you'll know how to use the From Contours and From Scratch terrain tools, how to use Drape, Smooth, Stamp, and add Detail Sandbox tools to edit those terrain meshes, and then an extension that I found and have been using for a while called Soap, Skin, and Bubble, which essentially you draw any shape of a closed polyline, and then it will create a terrain mesh based on whatever closed polyline shape that is. So let's get started. So the first tool we're going to look at is called From Contours, and if you don't already have it open, these tools are located in the Sandbox toolbar. So if you don't have this open, simply go up to View, and then Toolbars. Then once the window pops up, you're going to scroll down and make sure that the Sandbox checkmark box is checkmarked, and then hit Close. And this should pop up. And then for now, I'm just going to take this and link it right onto my toolbar to the left side of the screen. So in order to use the From Contours function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my contours and then the edge of the path, as well as where I want this terrain to stop along this retaining wall. Once I have these lines selected, I'm going to hit this button here, From Contours, and then it will generate a terrain mesh based on those lines. So what you'll notice is when you use this tool, it will generate terrain sometimes where you don't want it. And to delete all this out, what we're going to do is go up here to View, Hidden Geometry, so then we can see the lines that are creating this terrain mesh that we don't want down here. From here, I'm going to double click inside the terrain group and then simply start to delete out some of these hidden geometries that make up this mesh here that's covering up our walkway. And the same thing for the other side. Now, after we clean that up, you can see we have a nice clean terrain mesh along the side of this retaining wall. And then again, we don't want to see these hidden geometry lines all the time because one, they don't look so good, and two, when you have these turned on, they do start to bug down the hardware on your computer. So just to turn that off, we're just going to go up here to View and then uncheck the hidden geometry. Another way to make terrain is the From Scratch option, which allows you to create slopes and terrain from scratch on a grid. So what you can do is select the From Scratch button and then start to draw. And what you'll want to do is draw on 2 planes. So you probably want to start on your red axis. We'll do 150 feet. And then after we draw on the red axis, you can see it starts to come out this way on our green axis. So then I'm going to do another 150 feet. And what it'll do is create a flat terrain mesh that then we can edit from here. To edit this, what we'll want to do is double click inside the group and then use this function here called Smooth. When you select it, it'll see a red circle signifying your radius, and to change this, you can see down here where it says radius 30 feet, we can simply type 50 feet or 60 feet, whatever you need. And then once we have that, we can just simply start to select this face and move it however we want it. It's almost like shaping clay. Some extra functionality with that is if we hit our From Scratch again, we can see where it says grid spacing 10 feet. This is essentially how detailed this mesh is going to be. So if we increase the grid spacing to, let's say, 15, you can see that there are less squares and polygons that make up this mesh, therefore it's going to look less smooth. But if we draw another grid and decrease it to 5 feet, you can see that there are more squares that make up this mesh, therefore our smoothness will increase. So when you draw things like this, the more grids you have in your mesh, the more bogged down your computer is going to be. So I would definitely play with this one a little carefully. And then another tool we have is the add detail function. So if I go into this grid and select an area, I can hit this function here called add detail, and it will essentially divide up this grid with even more polygons, therefore adding more detail to the mesh. And in this case, in certain selected areas. This allows us to have a more smooth mesh, and you can see that this area up here is a little more smooth than this. So that covers two of the basic functions of creating terrain in SketchUp. However, both of these functions do have some drawbacks. As you can see with this one, we had to go in and delete out meshes that we didn't want, because as you use this tool, that's just kind of something that happens. But with the From Scratch tool, we're able to edit the terrain however we like. But in this case, it's locked to a square size. So if you wanted to shape something that's got a more organic perimeter to it, you would have to put this mesh under that and then kind of shape the mesh above the actual terrain. So in this case, it's a little harder to shape a terrain mesh to an organic perimeter. However, there is an extension provided by a developer in the SketchUp extension warehouse called Soap, Skin, and Bubble that allows us to edit terrain meshes that are locked to any organic shape that we can then edit. To get this extension, we're going to download it through the SketchUp extension warehouse, which is this button right here, the blue X that says extension warehouse. So we're going to click into it and then search for Soap, Skin, and Bubble. And it should pop up after a few types. And then it's this extension here by Joseph L. And then you'll just go ahead and install it. Once you install it, it should pop up anywhere on your screen. And when I get new extensions, I always like to lock them into my toolbar, usually on the top to separate extensions and the default tool sets. And then from here, we're going to want to create a closed polyline that we want to form this terrain around. So for an example, I'm going to create this terrain on this side of the walkway. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to want a closed polyline, meaning up to 3 or 4 lines that are connected and have no gaps. So I'm going to connect it from this endpoint to the edge of our walkway, and then the same thing on the other side. So from here, I'm going to select where I want it to meet on my retaining wall, the slope on both sides, as well as our edge of the walkway. Then from here, I'm going to hit the skin option, the generate soap skin in our new extension. And what it'll do is show you a grid that it's going to form it to. So to start off, it's going to appear as flat. And what it's asking here is how many grid spacings we want to divide this by. So you can see down here in the corner, it says 10. I'm going to try 35. You can go all the way up to 99, but I would try and stay within the 20 to 50 range. So after we specify our division, we're just going to hit enter. And what it'll do is form to this shape. So the benefits of doing this is that we can double click in this group, select our smooth tool, reduce our radius, and then we are then able to edit this terrain however we like, while it's still being kind of restricted to our perimeter. So the next thing I want to do after I edit and make sure I want my terrain mesh where I want it is I'm going to want to smoothen these edges, because I don't want to see this grid necessarily all the time. So what you can do to do that is go to Window, Default Tray, and then make sure this Soften Edges tray is selected. It'll be over here in your default tray. So what we can do is select our group, bring this degree slider all the way to the right, and then make sure we select Soften Coplanar. And what it'll do is soften up our mesh to where we don't have to see those grids. Another instance of terrain creation is using the from scratch at a larger scale and then draping road line work onto it, or any other line work that you may have. So I'm going to select this group. I'm going to select my contours and then do the from contours tool. This does have a lot more contours and polygons to generate, so it may take a little bit of time. So once we have that, we'll have our terrain mesh of Lower Howards Creek here. And then from here, I'm going to drape a road line work onto it so we can paint roads to it. So what you'll want to do is make sure you have your line work of whatever you're wanting to drape. And then, of course, make sure it's all closed so that it forms a face. It seems I have a gap somewhere in my line work. We can simply just keep drawing faces to find where this is. Ah, here it is. We had two little lines kind of coming out right here. What I'll do is delete both and connect. There we go. And then I'll go back and delete the lines that I added in. Once we have our road face generated, I'm going to select all of the road line work, and then I'm just going to move it straight above our terrain. And then what we can do is select this button here, the drape tool. So once I have all this selected, then I hit this, and then I'm going to choose which terrain to drape that onto, which in this case is this here. So it'll take some time to generate, but once we have it, we'll then have this flat geometry projected onto our terrain mesh here. So what we can do from here is then edit this. So I'm going to just come in and give it a asphalt material. So then we can see what those roads look like on this terrain. And then I'm going to go ahead and soften the edges on this, as well as hide my terrain geometry. And then I'll hide the roads that we draped as well. So now we can kind of see what this looks like. So the last tool that I want to show is the stamp tool. And what this does is takes a flat surface and essentially grades your terrain up to that surface. So this would work out really well for something like connecting terrain to a final floor elevation on a house or any building. So for this, I'm going to make a quick terrain mesh using the from scratch tool. There we go. And then I'm going to make just a quick, simple building footprint. So I'm going to make this pretty large building. So let's do 250, that's inches, 250 feet by, let's do 200 feet. And then just keep it square. All right. So what I'm going to do is move this above the terrain mesh about where I want it. And then from here, I'm going to select the stamp and then select the terrain. And what it will do is grade this terrain based on this footprint shape that we've made. And then we can set the elevation to it. So I'm going to make it to where it kind of halfway juts out between the cut and fill of this terrain. Similarly, let's say we move this over here. Before we choose our the terrain to stamp this to, we can also select the offset, meaning like how far the terrain will be from the footprint of this building. So in this case, I'm going to do 10 feet. And then select the terrain. Looks like it didn't quite get it. Let me try that again. Select the building, the stamp function, maybe 45 feet. There we go. And then our terrain. And you can see that the offset of this grade is much wider than the one we have set at 1 foot. And then if we soften those edges, you won't see those grids. All right, so that wraps up SketchUp Part 6, where we looked at the beginnings of creating terrain. Now, in this demo, it did seem kind of simple and straightforward. However, making terrain in 3D is actually a little difficult at first. So my advice to you is always start with your hardscape, as those are usually flat slopes. And then from there, as long as you have all your hardscape done, you should be able to then connect where your hardscape slopes down in your organic terrain meshes. So thanks, guys. Please reach out to us if you have any questions.